It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and the air felt warm and nice. Sarah Miller was walking home down a quiet road. She held a long cane in her hand, and it tapped the ground with every step she took. Tap, 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 it made a little rhythm as she moved. Sarah couldn't see anything around her because she was blind. Her eyes didn't work, but that didn't mean she missed out. She felt the world in her own special way. She heard every sound like birds chirping or leaves rustling in the wind. She felt every breeze that brushed against her face. Even though she couldn't see the trees or the sky, she knew they were there. Most people in her small town knew who she was. They called her the sweet blind lady. She was kind to everyone and never made a fuss. If you met her, you'd see her smile and hear her soft voice. She'd say hello to kids playing outside or wave at neighbors sitting on their porches. Everyone liked Sarah because she seemed so gentle and harmless. But here's the thing, Sarah wasn't just a quiet lady with a cane. Nope. She had a big, giant secret hiding inside her life. It was a secret so huge it could turn her little town upside down like flipping a pancake in the air. Nobody had a clue about it, not even the nosiest people who loved to gossip. Imagine this, Sarah walking along, minding her own business, with no idea that trouble was about to roll her way. That trouble? It came in the shape of some loud, noisy bikers. These weren't the friendly kind of bikers who wave and smile. Oh no, these guys were mean and liked to scare people. They rode big motorcycles that growled like angry dogs. They wore tough leather jackets and thought they were the kings of the road. Soon, they'd zoom right into Sarah's path, and that's when this story gets wild. But before we jump into what happens next, I've got something fun for you. Hey, you reading this? Where are you right now? Are you at home, maybe sitting on a comfy couch? Or are you outside, feeling the sun like Sarah did? Tell me in the comments below, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know. And if you like stories that surprise you and make your heart race, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's like telling me, keep the cool stories coming. So, are you ready? Who wants to find out what happens when those loudmouth bikers mess with Sarah? Let's go. Picture Sarah walking on that quiet road. Her cane tapped the ground like a little drum beat, tap, tap, tap. She wore a simple dress and a light sweater, even though it was warm. Her hair was tied back, and she moved slow and steady. To anyone watching, she looked like someone who couldn't hurt a fly. That's what made her so special in this town. People would see her and think, oh, that's just Sarah. She's nice but nothing exciting. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that Sarah's life had a hidden surprise, like a present waiting to be unwrapped. The road she walked on was peaceful. It wasn't busy like a city street with cars honking and people shouting. Nope, this was a country road. Tall green trees lined both sides, and the grass grew wild near the edges. Sometimes a bird would fly by, singing a happy song. Other times, a squirrel would scamper across the path, chasing after nuts. Sarah couldn't see these things, but she smiled anyway. She loved the sounds and the way the air smelled fresh. It was her favorite part of the day, walking home, feeling free. Now, let's talk about this town for a second. It was small, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. If you forgot your lunch at home, your neighbor might bring you a sandwich. Kids rode bikes up and down the streets, laughing and racing. Old folks sat on porches, sipping lemonade and waving at anyone who passed by. It was a happy little spot, and Sarah fit right in. People saw her walking with her cane every day, and they'd say, "There goes Sarah, sweet as pie." But sweet doesn't mean weak, does it? Nope. And Sarah was about to prove that in a big way. Here's where things get interesting. Sarah didn't live alone. She had a husband, but he wasn't around all the time. He was busy with a very important job, one that made him powerful and strong. Nobody in town talked about him much because he was gone a lot. When he was home, he stayed quiet, just like Sarah. They were a perfect pair, keeping to themselves. But his job? Oh, it was a doozy. We'll get to that soon, I promise. For now, just know that Sarah wasn't as alone as people thought. Back to that sunny afternoon. Sarah was almost halfway home. Her cane tapped along, and she hummed a little tune under her breath. She didn't know it yet, but those bikers were coming closer. Their motorcycles roared like thunder, shaking the ground. They loved making noise and showing off. To them, the road belonged to them, and anyone in their way better move fast. They didn't care who you were. If you were slow or different, they'd laugh and tease you. That's just how they were, mean and loud. Sarah didn't hear them yet. The sound was still far off, like a storm brewing in the distance. She kept walking, her cane leading the way. Tap, tap, tap. It was steady, like her heartbeat. She had no idea that those bikers would spot her soon. To them, she'd look like an easy target, someone they could bother for fun. They didn't know her secret. They didn't know who was waiting in the shadows of her life, ready to step in. So, what's the secret? I'll give you a tiny hint: it's big, it's tough, and it's got something to do with uniforms and medals. But no more yet. You'll find out soon enough, and trust me, it's worth the wait. Those bikers are about to learn a lesson they'll never forget. And Sarah? She's not just a sweet blind lady. She's got a surprise up her sleeve that'll make jaws drop all over town. Hey, before we keep going, let's check in again. Are you excited yet? Can you feel the buzz building up? I bet you're wondering what's gonna happen when those bikers meet Sarah. Tell me in the comments, are you ready to see some trouble stir up? And if you're loving this so far, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next part. This story's just getting started, and it's gonna be a wild ride. Sarah kept walking, one step at a time. The sun shone down, warming her shoulders. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, perfect. But normal doesn't last forever, does it? Nope. Change was coming, and it was coming fast on two wheels with engines roaring. Those bikers were about to roll into her quiet little world, and nothing would be the same after that. Stick around, because this is where the fun really begins. The air was calm and still until boom. A loud roar ripped through it like a giant monster waking up. It was the sound of motorcycles, big ones, growling and grumbling as they sped down the quiet road. Three tough-looking bikers zoomed up fast and stopped right next to Sarah. Their bikes were shiny and black, with engines so loud they made the ground shake a little. These guys weren't here to be nice. Nope. They wanted to cause trouble, and they picked Sarah to mess with. The bikers laughed, loud and mean, like bullies on a playground. They twisted their hands on the handles, making their engines scream even louder: vroom, vroom. It was so noisy it hurt your ears, and they did it on purpose to scare her. One of them, a skinny guy with a scruffy beard, leaned forward and yelled, "Hey, lady, move it." His voice was sharp and rude. Then he grabbed an empty soda can from his pocket, crumpled it up, and threw it right at Sarah. It flew through the air and landed with a clatter near her feet, bouncing on the road. Most people would jump or yell, but not Sarah. She didn't even flinch. Her cane kept tapping, tap, 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 and she kept walking, slow and steady, like nothing happened. Her face stayed calm, like a still pond with no ripples. The leader of the bikers was a big guy named Rick. He was tall and wide, with a messy beard and a leather jacket that made him look tough. Rick smirked, his lips curling up in a sneaky, mean way. He watched Sarah walking with her cane and thought it was funny. "What's wrong?" he teased, his voice loud over the rumbling engines. "Too slow to run." He laughed again, and his buddies joined in, chuckling like they told the best joke ever. To them, Sarah was just a weak, blind lady, someone they could pick on for fun. They didn't think she could do anything about it. Oh boy, were they wrong. Sarah didn't say a word back. She didn't yell or cry or even turn her head. She just kept going, one step at a time, her cane tapping the ground like a little drum. But inside, she wasn't scared. Nope. She was listening. She heard everything: their loud laughs, the engines roaring, the soda can hitting the road. She felt the air shake from their bikes. Even though she couldn't see them, she knew exactly what they were doing. And she knew something they didn't. Those bikers had no clue who they were messing with. They didn't know about the big surprise waiting just out of sight, like a storm hiding behind the hills. Rick and his crew thought they owned the road. They rode around town all the time, acting like kings. If someone was in their way, they'd honk or shout until they moved. Most people got scared and ran off fast. But Sarah? She wasn't like most people. She didn't run. She didn't even speed up. That made Rick mad. He wasn't used to someone ignoring him. "Look at her," he said to his buddies, pointing at Sarah. "Thinks she's too good to move." His friends nodded and grinned, egging him on. They loved trouble, and they thought Sarah was an easy target. The sun was still shining bright, making the road hot under Sarah's shoes. The trees along the sides swayed a little in the breeze, but the peace was gone now. Those bikers brought noise and meanness with them, like a dark cloud covering the sky. They circled their bikes closer to Sarah, kicking up dust with their tires. It floated in the air and tickled her nose, but she didn't cough or wave it away. She just kept her head high and her steps steady. To anyone watching, it looked like she didn't care. But Sarah wasn't weak, she was strong in a quiet way, the kind of strong that sneaks up on you. Rick leaned over his bike, staring at her. "Hey, lady," he shouted again. "You deaf too?" He thought that was hilarious and slapped his knee, laughing so hard his face turned red. His buddies cracked up too, revving their engines even louder. Vroom. The noise bounced off the trees and filled the whole road. They wanted Sarah to jump or scream or do something funny they could laugh at. But she didn't. She just kept walking, her cane tapping like it was saying, "I'm not afraid of you." That made Rick's smirk fade a little. He didn't like being ignored. It made him feel small, and Rick hated feeling small. The skinny biker with the beard piped up next. "Maybe she's lost," he said, snickering. "Need help finding your way, old lady?" He tossed another little piece of trash, a gum wrapper this time. It fluttered down and landed near Sarah's feet, joining the soda can on the ground. They were littering the road just to bug her, like kids throwing paper balls in class. But Sarah didn't stop to pick it up or yell at them. She acted like they weren't even there. That drove them nuts. The third biker, a short guy with a shiny helmet, revved his engine extra loud and zoomed his bike closer. He got so close the heat from his engine warmed Sarah's arm. "Come on, move it," he barked. "We got places to be." They all laughed again, thinking they were so cool. To them, this was a game. They didn't care that Sarah couldn't see or that she was just trying to get home. They saw her cane and her slow steps and thought, "Easy. We can mess with her all day." But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know someone was watching over Sarah, someone big, someone tough, someone they'd wish they never met. The road stretched out ahead, long and empty, with Sarah walking right down the middle. The bikers stayed close, riding in slow circles around her like sharks around a little fish. Dust flew up, and the air smelled like gas from their bikes. Their engines kept growling, loud and angry. Anyone else might have been scared. Three big, noisy guys against one quiet lady? That sounds spooky. But Sarah wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. Her face stayed peaceful, like she knew something they didn't. And she did. Oh, she did. Rick scratched his beard and squinted at her. "What's with this lady?" he muttered to his friends. "She's not even mad." He didn't get it. Most people would shout back or run away by now. But Sarah was different. That made him curious and a little annoyed. He wanted her to react. He wanted her to be scared. So he revved his engine again, making it roar like a lion roar. The sound was so loud it made birds fly out of the trees. Still, Sarah didn't stop. Tap, 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 her cane kept going, steady as ever. The bikers didn't know it yet, but they were digging a hole for themselves. Every shout, every laugh, every rude word was piling up trouble. They thought they were big and tough, but they were about to find out they picked the wrong person to tease. Sarah's secret was like a sleeping giant, waiting to wake up. And when it did, oh boy, those bikers would wish they'd stayed home. The days went by, one after another, and those mean bikers didn't stop. Every single day, they came back to bother Sarah. It was like a bad game they loved to play. They'd ride their big, loud motorcycles around her in circles, like vultures flying over something they wanted to pick at. Their engines growled and roared vroom, vroom, making the air shake. They yelled rude things, loud and nasty, trying to make her mad or scared. "Hey, slowpoke, get off our road," one shouted. Another laughed and kicked dirt with his boot, sending it flying toward Sarah. The dust puffed up in little clouds, sticking to her shoes and dress. But Sarah? She didn't yell back. She didn't cry or run away. She didn't even turn her head to look at them, not that she could see them anyway. Nope, she just kept walking, her cane tapping the ground, tap, 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 like nothing was wrong. Her face stayed calm, but her hand. Oh, It held that cane a little tighter. Her fingers squeezed it hard, like she was holding in something big. She wasn't weak, even if the bikers thought so. She was strong inside, and she heard everything they did. Their loud laughs. She heard them. Their mean insults. She caught every word. Even the way Rick, the leader, bragged about owning this town? Yup, she heard that too. Rick loved to talk big. He'd sit on his shiny black bike, puffing out his chest like a proud rooster. This town belongs to us, he'd say, smirking at his buddies. Nobody tells us what to do. His friends would nod and cheer, revving their engines to sound tough. They thought they were the bosses of everything: the road, the town, even the people. And Sarah? To them, she was just a quiet blind lady, someone they could tease and push around. They didn't know she was listening so close. They didn't know she was remembering every single thing they said and did. Day after day, it went on like this. The sun would rise, Sarah would walk home, and the bikers would show up. Sometimes they'd throw stuff like candy wrappers or little rocks just to see if she'd jump. The wrappers fluttered down like leaves, and the rocks clinked on the road near her feet. Other times, they'd race their bikes super close, so close she could feel the hot air from their engines on her skin. "Move it, lady," they'd shout, laughing like it was the funniest thing ever. But Sarah kept going tap, 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 slow and steady, like a turtle who knows it'll win the race. One afternoon, something new happened. Sarah was walking along, same as always, when a neighbor came out to talk. This neighbor was an older lady named Mrs. Jenny. She had gray hair and a kind smile, and she lived in a little house near the road. Mrs. Jenny watched the bikers sometimes from her porch, and she didn't like what she saw. That day, she shuffled over to Sarah, her slippers flapping on the ground. "Sarah," she whispered, leaning close so the bikers wouldn't hear, "why don't you tell someone about those mean boys? They shouldn't treat you like that." Sarah stopped walking for a second. She turned her head toward Mrs. Jenny, even though she couldn't see her. Then she smiled, a small, quiet smile that made her look like she knew something special. "Oh, don't worry," she said, her voice soft but sure. "Someone already knows." Mrs. Jenny blinked, surprised. "Who?" she asked, but Sarah didn't answer. She just smiled again and started walking tap, 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 like she'd said all she needed to say. Mrs. Jenny stood there, scratching her head, wondering what Sarah meant. Who knew? Who could stop those loud, rude bikers? The bikers didn't hear that little talk. They were too busy laughing and revving their engines down the road. They didn't see Sarah's smile or notice how calm she sounded. To them, nothing had changed. They kept circling her, kicking more dirt, yelling more rude stuff. "Hey, lady, you're in our way again," Rick shouted, grinning like a big bully. "This is our road, so move it." His buddies hooted and hollered, thinking they were so cool. They had no idea something was coming, something big, something sneaky, something they'd never expect. That something was like a shadow creeping closer. You couldn't see it yet, but it was there, hiding just out of sight. It was quiet, like Sarah, but strong, way stronger than those bikers and their noisy bikes. Every day they teased her, that shadow got a little closer. Every time they laughed or threw stuff, it moved in, watching and waiting. The bikers didn't feel it. They didn't hear it. They were too loud, too full of themselves. But Sarah? She knew it was there. She didn't say it out loud, but her tight grip on that cane and her little smile told you she wasn't worried one bit. The town kept going on like normal. Kids played in yards, dogs barked at squirrels, and the sun shone bright. But there was a funny feeling in the air now, like when you know a storm's coming, even if the sky's still clear. The bikers didn't notice that feeling. They kept riding around Sarah, acting like kings. "Nobody messes with us," Rick bragged one day, tossing an apple core toward her. It rolled across the road and stopped near a tree. Sarah stepped right past it, her cane tapping away. She didn't pick it up or complain. She just kept going, listening to Rick's big talk. Another day, they got even bolder. The skinny biker with the beard rode his bike so close he almost bumped her cane. "Oops," he said, laughing like it was a joke. Sarah wobbled a tiny bit but caught herself fast. She didn't fall, and she didn't yell. She straightened up and kept walking tap, tap, tap. Rick clapped his hands and cheered. Nice try, he called to his friend. She's tougher than she looks. They thought it was funny, but they didn't get it. Sarah was tougher than they could ever guess. The shadow kept creeping closer, day by day. It wasn't loud like the bikers. It didn't roar or shout. It was silent, sneaky, like a cat stalking a mouse. The bikers didn't see it because they weren't looking. They were too busy making noise and feeling big. But Sarah felt it. She knew it was coming, and she wasn't afraid. When Mrs. Jenny asked her that question, why don't you tell someone? Sarah's answer wasn't just words. It was a hint. Someone already knows. Who was that someone? What did they know? The bikers were about to find out, and it was gonna be a shock. It all happened on a Friday, a regular day that turned into something wild. The sun was high in the sky, and Sarah was walking home like always. Her cane tapped the ground, tap, 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 as she moved down that quiet road. The bikers showed up, same as they did every day. Their motorcycles roared loud, vroom, vroom, shaking the air. They circled around her, laughing and yelling, ready to tease her again. Rick, the big leader, grinned and revved his engine extra loud, thinking it'd scare her. His buddies joined in, hooting and hollering like they owned the place. But this time, something was different. Sarah didn't keep walking. Nope. She stopped right there in the middle of the road. Her cane stayed still, and she turned her head toward the bikers. Even though she couldn't see them, it was like she was looking straight at them. Then she spoke, and her voice was steady, not shaky at all. You've had your fun, she said, clear and calm. Now it's time to stop. The words hung in the air, strong and simple. Rick heard her and laughed so hard he almost fell off his bike. His big belly shook, and his face turned red. Who's gonna make us, huh? He shouted, smirking like it was the funniest thing ever. You. He pointed at Sarah and laughed again, loud and mean. His buddies cracked up too, slapping their knees and revving their engines, vroom. They thought she was joking. A blind lady telling them to stop? To them, it was silly. They didn't think she could do anything. Oh boy, were they in for a surprise. Right then, the ground started to shake. It wasn't the bikes this time, it was something bigger. A loud rumble filled the air, like thunder rolling closer. The bikers stopped laughing and looked around, confused. What was that? Suddenly, a sleek black SUV screeched to a stop right next to Sarah. Its tires squealed on the road screech, and dust flew up in a big cloud. The doors swung open fast, and out stepped a man. Not just any man, a tall, strong man in a crisp military uniform. His clothes were neat and green, with shiny medals pinned to his chest. His eyes were hard, like steel, and he stood straight, towering over everyone. This was General James Miller, Sarah's husband. He wasn't just some guy, he was a big deal in the army. Those medals. They showed he'd done brave things and led lots of people. His boots hit the ground with a loud thud, and he walked right toward the bikers. Rick's jaw dropped so low it nearly touched his bike. Wait, what? He stammered, his voice all wobbly. His tough guy smirk was gone, and his eyes got wide. The other bikers froze too, their laughs stuck in their throats. They didn't know what to say or do. James stepped forward, standing tall like a giant. He looked at the bikers with those steel eyes, and his voice came out deep and strong. You've been harassing my wife, he said, pointing at Sarah. That ends today. Every word hit like a hammer, bam, bam, bam. The bikers blinked, their mouths open like fish out of water. Harassing his wife? They didn't even know Sarah had a husband, let alone a tough army general. They thought she was just a quiet lady, all alone. Boy, were they wrong. Rick tried to talk. We didn't mean, he started, but his voice squeaked like a scared mouse. He couldn't finish because James took another step closer. The medals on his chest glinted in the sun, shiny and bright. The bikers shrank back a little, their bikes suddenly feeling small next to this big man. Sarah stood there, still calm, her cane in her hand. She didn't say anything, but that little smile from before was back on her face. She knew James was coming. She knew he'd take care of things. The skinny biker with the beard dropped his soda can clank, and it rolled across the road. His hands shook, and he looked at his buddies like, what do we do now? The short guy with the shiny helmet gulped loud, his eyes darting from James to Sarah and back again. They weren't laughing anymore. Nope. They weren't revving their engines or kicking dirt. They were scared, real scared, because this wasn't a game anymore. This was serious. James crossed his arms, his uniform stretching tight over his strong shoulders. He didn't yell or wave his fists. He didn't need to. Just standing there, he looked like a wall they couldn't push over. "You've been picking on her for weeks," he said, his voice steady but mad. "Throwing stuff, yelling, trying to scare her. Did you think she wouldn't tell me?" The bikers shook their heads fast, like little kids caught stealing cookies. They didn't think she'd tell anyone. They didn't think she could tell anyone. But James knew everything. Rick tried to act tough again. "We were just having fun," he said, but it sounded weak, like a balloon losing air. James didn't even blink. "Fun's over," he said, sharp and final. "You don't mess with my wife. Not today. Not ever." The words cut through the air, and the bikers felt them in their bones. They looked at Sarah, standing there so quiet, and then at James, so big and strong. How did they miss this? How did they not know? The black SUV sat there, shiny and still, like a sleeping dragon. The bikers stared at it, then at James, then at Sarah. Their tough guy act was falling apart fast. Rick's hands fidgeted on his bike handles, and he mumbled, "We didn't know she was your wife." James tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Doesn't matter," he said. "You don't treat anyone like that, wife or not." That shut Rick up real quick. He didn't have anything smart to say back. Sarah tapped her cane once tap, and stepped closer to James. She didn't need to say much. She'd already said her piece, it's time to stop. And now James was here to make sure it happened. The bikers looked at each other, their faces pale. They'd been so loud, so mean, for so long. They thought Sarah was weak because she couldn't see. They thought she was alone because she was quiet. But now they saw the truth. She wasn't weak. She wasn't alone. She had a husband who could make them wish they'd never met her. The ground stopped rumbling, but the air felt heavy. The bikers' engines were quiet now, just humming soft and scared. James stood there, a giant in green, ready to protect Sarah. Rick's jaw stayed dropped, and his buddies looked like they wanted to disappear. This was at the big moment they never saw coming. The secret was out. Sarah wasn't just a blind lady. She was the wife of a military general, and that changed everything. The bikers didn't know what to do. They stood there, scared and shaky, as General James stared them down. Rick, the big leader, tried to talk his way out. "We didn't mean any harm," he said, his voice wobbly. "It was just a joke." The skinny biker nodded fast, and the short one mumbled, "Yeah, just fun." But James wasn't buying it. He shook his head, his face hard like a rock. "No more excuses," he said, strong and clear. He wasn't going to let them wiggle free, not after all they'd done to Sarah. James pulled out a little radio from his pocket. He pressed a button and spoke into it, calm but firm. "Send the team in," he said. That's when it got wild. A big truck roared up the road, and out jumped military police soldiers in green uniforms, just like James. They had shiny badges and handcuffs dangling from their belts. The bikers' eyes got huge. "Wait, what's happening?" Rick yelped, stepping back. But it was too late. The soldiers moved fast, grabbing Rick and his crew. Click, 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 the cuffs snapped onto their wrists. Rick tried to pull away. "Hey, let me go," he shouted, but the soldiers were strong. They hauled him off his bike like he weighed nothing. The skinny biker and the short one didn't even fight, they just hung their heads, looking small and silly now. Another truck rolled up, a big one with a flat back. Soldiers started towing the motorcycles away, hooking them up with chains. The bikes, those loud, shiny things the bikers loved, were gone in minutes. The tough guy act? It crumbled fast, like a sandcastle when the waves hit. The townsfolk came out to watch. People peeked from their porches and yards, eyes wide. "That's Sarah's husband," they whispered to each other. Some pointed at James, amazed. "He's an army guy? A general?" Others looked at Sarah, standing tall next to him. They couldn't believe it. All this time, they thought she was just a quiet blind lady. Now they saw her with James, and it hit them, she wasn't alone. She had a big, strong husband and a whole army behind her. Sarah didn't say much. She didn't need to. She stood there, her cane in her hand, her head high. Her quiet strength shone like the sun. She didn't yell or cheer, she just let James handle it. The bikers were dragged away, their heads down, their loud voices gone. The military police loaded them into the truck, and off they went, rumbling down the road. The townsfolk kept whispering, "Mess with Sarah, and you're messing with an army." It spread fast, everyone knew now. The road got quiet again. The dust settled, and the birds started singing like nothing happened. Sarah and James stood together, a team. The town learned a big lesson that day: don't judge people by how they look. Sarah was small and blind, but she had power, quiet power, and a husband who'd fight for her. The bikers. They were gone, and their mean days were over. Justice was served, and it felt good. The sun was going down, painting the sky with pretty colors: orange, pink, and gold. Sarah and James walked home together, side by side, as the day turned into night. Sarah's cane tapped the ground, tap, 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 steady and calm, just like always. James walked tall, his uniform still neat, his medals catching the last bits of sunlight. They didn't say much, but they didn't need to. They'd shown everyone something big that day, something important. And what was that? Looks can trick you. Think about it. The bikers, Rick and his loud crew, thought they were the toughest guys around. They roared through town on their big motorcycles, yelling and laughing like they were the kings. They picked on Sarah because she was quiet and blind. They thought she was weak, someone they could tease and push around. But they were so wrong. The loudest bullies, the ones who act big and tough, often fall the hardest. And that's exactly what happened. When James showed up, those bikers didn't look tough anymore. They looked small and scared, like little kids caught doing something bad. Then there's Sarah. She didn't shout or fight back. She didn't need to. She stayed quiet, walking with her cane, keeping her strength inside. The quiet ones. They've got power you'd never guess. Sarah had a secret, a big one. Her husband was a strong army general, ready to stand up for her. Nobody saw that coming, not the bikers, not the townsfolk, not anyone. It was like a magic trick, poof, and suddenly, everything changed. Sarah wasn't just a blind lady. She was someone with a hidden strength, someone you couldn't push around. That's the cool thing about this story. It makes you think. Next time you see someone, don't just look at what's on the outside. Don't decide they're weak or strong based on how loud they are or what they look like. You never know who's standing behind them, ready to fight back. Maybe they've got a friend, a family member, or a secret power all their own. Like Sarah, they might surprise you when you least expect it. So think twice. The world is full of surprises, and people aren't always what they seem. Imagine if you were there, watching it all happen. The bikers laughing one minute, then shaking in their boots the next. Sarah standing tall, her quiet smile saying more than words ever could. James stepping out of that SUV, big and brave, ready to protect her. It's a picture that sticks in your head, a lesson wrapped in a wild story. It tells you to be kind, to look deeper, to remember that everyone's got something special about them, even if you can't see it right away. So, what did you think of that twist? Wasn't it awesome when James showed up and the bikers' jaws dropped? I bet you didn't see that coming either. Tell me about it below, I want to hear what you liked best. And here's a fun question: have you ever seen someone surprise the world like Sarah did? Maybe it was a kid at school who seemed shy but turned out to be super smart. Or a friend who stood up to a bully when nobody expected it. Share your stories, I'm all ears. This isn't the end, you know. There's more where this came from, more stories, more surprises, more fun. So stick around. See you in the next one, where we'll find out what happens when someone else gets a big shock. Life's full of twists, just like this, and I can't wait to tell you more. Keep being curious, keep being kind, and always look a little closer, you never know what you'll find. Sarah and James taught us that, and it's a lesson worth keeping. Catch you later.